Hi, John.
Hello, Tammy.
Now, Sly, I've been very lucky to be one of the producers of your podcast, Naked City. It is the best job in the newsroom. But you also helped me get my job at The Age. You plucked me from obscurity.
No, you'd done a brilliant series for the Shep News, and you had reopened a particular murder case, and as a consequence there was a conviction. And you and your editor did such a remarkable job. It was actually Ron Eddles said, you should have a look at this young kid, Tammy Mills.
Well, this is exactly why I've brought this up, so you could just talk about me.
But then you wrote the worst story on some sheep that had got out. I had second thoughts, but nonetheless.
Always bringing me back down to my rightful spot. But moving to the reason why we're talking today, this is the last episode of what, your 7th season of Naked City?
Would appear to be, yeah. I think over 100 episodes.
Very good. So we wanted to hear from all of you who are listening now and watching now who've helped support us this year. We've received a whole bunch of emails, including someone asking for your star sign. But let's get to the meaty ones first. So firstly, there were several questions about Mark Brandon, aka Chopper Read, charismatic, a killer, and thanks to you, he became an author.
Yes, Andrew Rule and myself, we were the ones who ghosted his books after I'd had some interaction with him in prison, and he started writing letters. He's purported to be his life story. And, of course, they became best-selling books. So the first one was from the inside, because they were written from within Pentridge. When he was finally released, he moved to Tasmania, initially at Launceston. And we were writing the book from the outside when he sort of ran off the rails. And he shot a then friend of his, Sydney Michael Edward Collins, and he was in the back of Mark's car, which was sort of pretty damning evidence because I think they found the bullet in the back seat. And as the story goes, Mark took Collins to the Launceston Hospital and dropped him off, and Collins survived. Mark was charged, and he came up with what he thought was a clever legal tactic, which was to say, I'm a professional hitman. I do not take my victims to hospital. Seemed clever, but by doing so, he opened up his criminal past, which, as you know, Tammy, usually can't be used in a trial. So, okay, you're a professional criminal. So they were able to read into evidence much of what he'd written in the first book, embellished or not. And, of course, he was convicted. But because of his history, he was declared a dangerous criminal and given an indefinite sentence. And it took several years for him to appeal that to finally be released. The prosecutor was a fellow called Damien Bugg, a senior counsel. And Mark didn't hold a grudge because eventually, when he bought a greyhound and raced a greyhound, he called it the Bugster in honour of the bloke who'd sent him to prison.
And that goes to our first question, right? Because Adam, his name's Adam Jones, he sent this question. He said, your old mate Chopper went down for the murder of Sydney Collins, having just read one of Chopper's books where he protests that he did not do it. It's unlike a crime to lie. Interested to know your view on it.
So he was not charged with the murder of Sid Collins. He was charged with the shooting of Sid Collins because Collins didn't straighten up after being shot in the guts in 1992. And in 2002, he went missing up in New South Wales, and his body was never found. His Falcon ute was, but no body. Mark was interviewed over it. He protested his innocence and said the New South Wales coppers cleverly decided to come down and interview him just during the spring carnival so they could go to the races. He protested his innocence, but when he was terminally ill, Mark gave his last interview, which was a paid interview.
Just 16 days before he died, I sat down with Mark Brandon Read for his last ever interview.
And Mark, ever the value for money, knowing he was about to die, confessed to the murder of Collins purely to give the media outlet a headline.
Right. And so what happened then?
Oh, I can tell you what happened then, but we took him, I got him I hopped into his car, going back to his place, bang, 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 bang. And I shot him the last time with his gun. I killed him this time with his gun. That's how stupid he is. I shot him the first time with his gun. I shot him the second time with his gun. How stupid is this person? He is an idiot, complete idiot.
And this time, were you shooting to kill him?
Oh, yeah, this time I was shooting to kill him. Last time he just got it in the guts and a trip to hospital. Very Christian last time.
No, he didn't kill him. He didn't go to New South Wales to kill Collins. He shot Collins in an act of bravado, which was pretty stupid and cost him, I think, five years of his life.
We have another question here from John Payne, also about Chopper, and he asked whether the character dubbed Dave the Jew was a fictional or real-life person.
No, Dave's a real person. Dave was part of the young Mark Reed's sort of street gang, along with, say, Mad Charlie. Mad Charlie tried to change his nickname to Machine Gun Charlie, but there was already a Machine Gun Charlie. So he tried to be called Mad Machine Gun Charlie, which was to a bigger mouthful.
Isn't the thing like you're not supposed to come up with your own nicknames?
Yeah, it doesn't really work. No. So he himself, Mad Charlie, was shot dead outside his Caulfield house. Dave was one of these crazies that would do what Mark would say. They were all very, very loose. When Mark got out of prison and came back to Melbourne after his stint in Tassie, and he did try and fly a right, Dave made contact with him, and he knew that was just going to suck him back into a strange old world. So my best recollection of Dave is that he sort of straightened up as well in middle age. I don't know if he's still with us. If you are, Dave, drop me a line.
And now, Sly, we'll move on to what I'll call the gangland chapter. So it's a lot of questions we got from your listeners and readers about the gangland. And John Lawrence wants to know more information on Matthew Charles Johnson. He's the well-known killer of Carl Williams, of course, but not much is known about him.
There's two types of serious gangsters, if you like. There are those who survive on the outside, and there are those that survive on the inside. Now, the skills to survive on the outside is largely money, contacts, and the capacity to commit crime. On the inside, it's actually about brute strength and cunning. So Chopper Reed was one of the crooks who was more dangerous inside than outside because he had a prison gang. In the end, Mark, when he wanted to kill everybody in H Division, some of his own friends in the Overcoat gang turned on him, including Greg Bluey Brazel, who stabbed him in a sneak attack. So Brazel becomes the sort of underworld heavy, and he was bright, ridiculously strong, and he made a lot of prisoners' lives miserable. But eventually he gets bashed by Matthew Johnson, known as the General. Now, Johnson is a terrifying figure, massive man, shaved head. Justice Betty King, who as a prosecutor and a judge dealt with all the underworld figures, said only one person ever scared me, and that was Matty Johnson. Johnson had 150 offences by the time he was a young man. He was in adult prison at a very young age. To give you an idea, he was acquitted of this crime, but it was alleged that he killed somebody. Well, he bashed somebody, cut them open, poured petrol in their body and in their mouth, set it on fire, and this was over a $20 drug debt. So we get Matthew, and he ends up in Barwon Prison in a small unit which includes Carl Williams, the drug dealer turned police informer, and a fellow called Little Tommy Ivanovic. Now, police were concerned of having Carl Williams in this company, but Carl was saying, if I'm going to give evidence, because he had given evidence in relation to the double murder of Terence and Christine Hodson, if I'm going to give evidence, I want to be with my mates, and I've squared it off with them. Carl was of the view, I'm giving up an alleged corrupt copper, that's okay. Anyway, the word was coming in through Ivanovic, you are with a dog, that is Carl, and this is going to damage you. So eventually, Matty Johnson snuck up in 2010 in April, snuck up behind Carl with the stem from the seat of an exercise bike and bashed him over the head, killing him. Tommy Ivanovic was not watching, and yet he didn't jump or start or turn. He knew what was going to happen.
I think you said he had his back.
He had his back to him,
the whole time.
And the conventional wisdom is there was somebody on the outside who was frightened Carl was going to give him up over another murder, and he persuaded, through Tommy Ivanovic to Matty Johnson, to do this particular crime. I remember going to the court and seeing there, sitting there, was Matty Johnson, and he had tried to lose weight, but the suit was so tight on his bulging biceps it looked like it was going to burst. And he still had, when you buy a suit, there's often a few spare buttons just pinned to it, and it still had that. So it had obviously been a suit that had just been bought. He declared it was self-defence, and the jury didn't accept it. Matt would write to me and critique stories, which was his right.
And you're flipping through your papers now, presumably to find one of these letters.
He wrote a poem called Convicted. The trial was an outright circus full of clowns and many tricks. It was doomed from the get-go. Still I battled hard against the pricks. The media loved it. To them, the victim well known. I'm just me. To the wolves I was thrown. The evidence was brutal. 7 hits to the head. Dragged around by the feet. Still and dead. My story was truthful. It was kill or die. The jury didn't believe it. They thought it a lie. It was I against their very best. Still, their story I contradicted. The enemy owned the justice system, so me, I got convicted.
I don't know
Signed
what
Matty
else
Johnson.
I don't know what I was expecting, but a poem from Matthew Johnson was not something that I was expecting at all.
There were several.
Is he still he's still in jail?
He got 32. He critiqued Underbelly, the series. A Channel 9 comedy about Fat Boy and his crew. Fat Boy and Roberta portrayed ever so true. Roberta's filthy mouth would put any truckie to shame. They hit the nail on the head. Got herself to blame. Fat Boy looked the goose, dangerous, fat and dumb. He eats fried chicken by the buckets, doesn't leave a crumb. And I think we'll leave it there. Because...
Are you tempted to help Matthew Johnson release a book of poetry on the inside?
I think Matty's on his own there, but that's the nature of life inside. There are gangs inside, and there are some criminals, and when Mark was a criminal, he was a prime example, that are actually more powerful inside than out. Mark would get out for 6 months and create havoc and then commit a crime to go back inside. In the end, he realised what a profound waste of life it was.
Well, I imagine when you're in jail for such a long time, in and out, you become so used to it, that's your normal world as opposed to everything on the outside.
Absolutely. I mean, when Mark came out, of course, when he went in, there weren't credit cards. And when he came out, people were scanning things at the supermarket, and he was terrified.
So staying on the underworld and all things gangland related, there was a really interesting question from Nicholas Westgarth, and he lives in Sunshine, and that's in Melbourne's west, and it's home to several notorious gangland figures. And I'm having trouble with Nicholas's question because I don't think I can even say the name or the pseudonym of the person that he mentions without breaching about 1 million suppression orders. His question is about this cobweb of informers and crooks that rolled on each other and started giving detectives information to break down kind of this wall of silence during the Gangland War, which is, of course, when a whole bunch of murders were happening in Melbourne. He was wondering what, if anything, that you could tell him about a particular crim whose identity is a secret. And Nicholas made the point that we know a little bit about these other guys that are dubbed the runner and the driver. But why is so little spoken about this particular person? Is it just, say, the runner and the driver, their story plays better to an audience from a storytelling perspective?
Well, the runner and the driver were actually involved in murders, and so they were the ones who were paid by Carl Williams to kill Michael Marshall in South Yarra. And the driver was very, very quick to make it clear he would do a deal, and he got the deal of a century, even though he was probably the worst of the lot.
Because the Michael Marshall murder, that was the one that was captured on listening devices.
So they were absolutely stone cold done. Now, the runner had not been paid by Carl, and Carl wanted him to plead guilty. And, he probably would have if Carl had looked after the runner's mother as he promised. But in the end, when he asked his mother, he said Carl had given him $1,500. And that's when he made the statements. And I think he was pivotal to the ultimate. Once the evidence of both the runner and the driver were tested over the Marshall murder and accepted, Carl then pleaded guilty to several other murders. There was the veteran who recently died in a New South Wales prison. He was just a terrible man who had over decades manipulated the system with half-baked confessions and statements. And what you know about the veteran, he would always do the best for himself. So he's no great loss when he died. And there was a fellow called the Lieutenant who was sort of the advisor to Carl. And he made some really interesting statements, because after Carl Williams met Mick Gatto at the Crown Casino, Carl had second thoughts about killing Gatto, and he went to the lieutenant and said, "What do you think?" And he said, "Well, I just don't know. Go and talk to Andrew Veneman." And Veneman said, "No, you've got to do it," which was fatal for Veneman, because ultimately he was shot dead. Actually, Andrew wrote to the editor here, "I'm offended by your article on page 6 of The Age on December 14. I am known as Benji, but by some friends, and I have been a friend of Dino Dibra and Paul Kalapalitis. The suggestion that I have been involved in their murders is slanderous and wrongly could endanger my life." He then proceeds to say, "If I don't get an immediate apology and retraction, I shall be seeking legal advice." Well, he wasn't really able to, because he was shot dead by Mick Gatto. And, of course, he did kill Dino Dibra and Paul Kalapalitis, amongst others.
Well, it's almost like a piece of history, because that's in his handwriting.
Yeah.
He hasn't typed that.
So, sadly, Andrew, you didn't get a chance. So,
and what's the purpose of giving all these pseudonyms to the point that we lose track of who is who?
Witness protection.
Because, wouldn't they all know who each other are?
Yeah, anyway, witness protection is such. Of course they know who they are. But it's interesting that even after death, the protection is there. And I can only assume that's to protect their families, because we have known on occasions where informers' families have been punished. In the case of, there was one teenage girl who was abducted and murdered, and it's my belief that was done as punishment for a relative giving evidence.
Because at the moment we're seeing kind of a spate of these types of attacks in Sydney, where it seems like the underworld are targeting the relatives of known crooks as punishment. I kind of thought that was a red line that wouldn't be crossed, but clearly that's been a line that's been considered and done and used and for a long, long time.
Well, in the case of the 1997 murder of Jane Thurgood Dove in Niddrie, it's my belief that the target was a criminal's wife up the road, and that was Peter Kipri's wife Carmel, who also had children, lived 3 from the corner in Muriel Street, and had a similar haircut. And the view of the police is that the hitmen were told, go and kill the mother 3 from the corner with the blonde hair.
One more question on the gangland. This is from Harrison, who asks, has there been a comprehensive family tree done on Melbourne's underworld? For example, Harrison writes, Trish Kane, daughter of Les Kane, married to Jason Moran. And there's another person he talks about that's apparently the grandson of an underworld figure killed by Snowy Cutmore. And so it goes on. There seems to be many links in the underworld.
Oh, there is. If I can find the piece of paper, I'd do it. But what we got is just people just sort of go into the family business. So you've got the Canes, you've got Les, Brian and Ray, Muscles Kane, three brothers. They were brought up in Crivelli Street, Preston. I lived around the corner. You never went to Crivelli Street. It was no-go zone. And the Canes lived there. Equally in the police circles, there were the O'Loughlin's, and they were brothers who joined the police force, and there'd be 24 O'Loughlin's who've joined the police force. So the O'Loughlin's, the brothers, all went. Rite of passage was to be stationed at Preston, and virtually all the O'Loughlin's would fight the Canes. And at one occasion, one of the O'Loughlin's went to one of the Canes' houses, and a little kid said, "Dad, Mr. O'Loughlin's here." And the dad said, "Which flippin' one?" Brian Kane is said to have murdered Ray Chuck, who was shot dead in the Melbourne Magistrates Court. Ray Chuck's wife's sister married the notorious Russell Cox, who spent 11 years on the run, having escaped from New South Wales. So there's a link there. Brian Kane kills Ray Chuck. Russell Cox, to square up effectively to his brother-in-law, along that line, and Rod Collins are said to have killed Brian Kane in the Quarry Hotel. When Brian's killed, there's a death notice, basically Uncle Brian from little Jason. That's Jason Moran. Jason Moran married Les Kane's daughter. Just to keep it in the family, when Judy Moran decides to set a contract to kill her brother-in-law, Des Tuppence Moran, one of those recruited is one of the Kane girls. The veteran, he's from 3 generations of crooks. The After Dark Bandits, Doug and Peter Morgan, twins who would do jobs on the same day, their dad was an armed robber and the kids would act as lookouts. And just to make it even more incestuous, Victor Pearce's wife, Wendy, was having an affair with Victor's armed robbery partner, Graham Jensen. So I don't know what happens at the reunions. While we take a short break, here's a suggestion. Why don't you leave a review on either Apple or Spotify? They're very interesting, and some are just out there crazy.
And this kind of brings us along to what I'll call the questionable cops section. Elizabeth Kleinhentz asks, what eventually happened to Jack Ford and Jack Matthews? So, Sly, before you answer that, can you tell us who these two are?
Both were heads of the homicide squad, and both considered great investigators. Ford was considered chief commissioner material, but it was at a time when abortions were illegal, and that was under the homicide squad, and there was a protection racket going on. And some of the homicide squad were being paid off by doctors who were performing abortions. Interestingly, a Catholic police officer, Brian Harding, had charged a doctor with abortion. He was a suburban detective and fell on it and did his job. And he was taken to the races by Jack Ford. They're both interested in horse racing, and he basically tried to bribe him and said, "We're going to, do this." And he actually ended up contacting Brian's wife and saying, "Look, just tell him to pull his head in,"
to drop the case against the...
Which he didn't.
Yeah.
So there were allegations for some years of this happening, and the then Chief Secretary, which we would now call Police Minister, Arthur Ryler, pushed back about having an inquiry. He said the homicide squad was very gentle with me at the death of my wife, Lady Anne Ryler. Well, there's a reason for that. Lady Anne Ryler was found in the back garden of her Kew home in 1969, dead. She wasn't wearing shoes and her gumboots were nearby. the homicide squad were called, they got the pathologist on Saturday night, who was profoundly drunk, to do the autopsy, and while doing it, there was suggestions that this was all natural causes. And subsequently, he signed off that it was an aneurysm, and she was cremated straight away, and good old Arthur was able to marry his mistress 6 months later. So maybe that's why he was so sympathetic. Eventually, and again, it tells you why we need a broad spectrum in the media, because the Age, the Herald, the Sun, no one was touching this. It was actually the great reporter Evan Whitten, who worked for the Truth newspaper at the time, who campaigned on behalf of Dr. Bertram Weiner, and eventually there was an inquiry called the K Inquiry, which established that there was widespread bribery. And Jack Matthews and Jack Ford, both poster boys for homicide, they got 5 years, and a former detective, Martin Jacobson, he got jailed for 3. So that what was going on. It was one element within the homicide squad that was taking the money, and there was the other that would look the other way. So
in terms of, so I've got this crystal clear, the allegations around that, or not even allegations if they've been proven in court, is that some members of the homicide squad were taking bribes to look the other way and not charge doctors who were performing abortions.
Exactly.
To me, I'm like, that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, but it's like bad laws are bad laws. Now, probably if there'd been a truckload of legitimate doctors charged, it would have brought the thing to a head and the law would have been changed. Back in the 50s, trying to outlaw off-course betting in horse racing was simply silly because there would be a demand. But that doesn't excuse 60% of the police force that were taking bribes. And that's where you can rationalise anything.
Yeah.
So why not take money from drug dealers? Because they're satisfying a public demand. And there's always going to be drug dealers, so why shouldn't I take a slice of it? So you can justify anything. The law's the law.
Yeah. And Sly, another question's come in from someone who is interested to know if you've heard anything about what Dennis Tanner is up to these days.
Dennis Tanner's a former detective. He was embroiled as a suspect in a task force investigation codenamed Kale, and that was into the death of Adele Bailey and Jennifer Tanner. Now, Jennifer Tanner was Dennis's sister-in-law, and she was found shot dead in her Bonnie Doon home, November 1984. The first police investigation, which was botched, suggested it was suicide, but in fact she'd been shot twice in the head with a bolt-action gun, and there were bullet holes through her hands.
So the suggestion being?
That she had her hand over the gun. Now, the first inquest said suicide, but that was quashed. And in the second one in 1988, the coroner implicated Dennis, saying he was the person who shot Jennifer Tanner. Now, Dennis has always protested his innocence. And last I heard, he was driving trucks. Sometimes he likes to bag me online under the alias David Jones, and I'm not quite sure why, because I actually have written that I think the coroner went too far in saying that he was the person who shot Jennifer Tanner, because there's a multitude of other potential scenarios. Dennis is adamant, and I'm not sure how he can be, that it was suicide. My rudimentary studies on these matters is that, and there have been studies that show very, very, very few women shoot themselves, particularly in the face. Now, forget about the difficulties in shooting yourself in the head, reloading a bolt-action firearm and shooting yourself a second time, leads me to the conclusion that it was murder unless otherwise proven. That doesn't mean Dennis did it. Sticking point for me with Tanner is that in his book he says the first time I became aware that she was shot twice was the first inquest. And he goes on to say he really liked Jennifer. Well, you're a trained detective, and he's a big alpha male, Dennis. He's never been backwards in expressing his opinion. So why would an investigator learn at an inquest that his loved sister-in-law has been shot twice in the head? Why doesn't he then approach homicide and go, what the hell are you doing? Why? I demand this be reinvestigated, but he didn't. Now, perhaps he didn't know, and perhaps he thought somebody else, perhaps Jennifer's husband in Laurie. I'm not saying Laurie did it, but maybe Dennis thought that. I don't know. But it seems beggars belief to me that Dennis did not pursue aggressively what happened to Jennifer, as he is still pursuing his own innocence. I got embroiled in this in the strangest way because Laurie was at one point knocked out and someone put a boning knife through his ankle. And that remains unsolved. Who did that? But strangely enough, Dennis made a statement implicating me as the offender.
Sorry.
So
What?
The statement was made that I had been up to the Tanner farm and that I had been sneaking around pretending my car had broken down, and I'd hopped onto the property saying I need to use the phone and had been shooed away. As a consequence, I was formally interviewed by the late, great detective John Kapitanovsky, and I can still see John smile as he's interviewing me, knowing that this was absolute rubbish. But during the interview, halfway through, he said, I thought this was rubbish, but you may need a lawyer because I'm starting to think you're guilty. He was just having a lend of me. But the boning knife incident has never been solved, and I think Dennis has an argument regarding the second inquest where he was fingered as the person who shot Jennifer Tanner. I don't think there is sufficient evidence to say that. So I say it's murder, by whom I don't know.
And of course, I'd imagine Laurie would say he had nothing to do with it.
Laurie said he's got nothing to do with it. And
just
of course,
as you say you have nothing to do with the boning knife incident.
You know, it's going to be one of those mysteries. Dennis will go to his grave protesting his innocence. And he believes, and he's made it clear on a number of occasions, that he thinks he's the victim of a miscarriage of justice.
And Sly, what about the Adele Bailey case? What was that about?
Well, Adele Bailey was a transsexual who was last seen in St Kilda.
She was a trans sex worker, wasn't she?
Yeah. And her body was found in a mine shaft not far from the Tanner house. Tanner had some dealings with her when he was a cop at St Kilda. There are multiple of theories there, but the coroner quite rightly in that case said there was no direct evidence to point to Dennis.
Still the cases that have always fascinated me. We received a number of emails about cold cases, in fact, and the first relates to a man you have reported on significantly throughout your career, and that's serial killer Peter Dupas. Katrina asks, thoughts on Peter Dupas? He was a suspect in the murder of Renita Brunton. It's a 1993 cold case in a shop in Sunbury where she was stabbed more than 100 times. I live in Sunbury, Katrina writes, and I have never forgotten this chilling case.
Dupas was a person of interest in the case of Renita Brunton, who was stabbed 100 times. And that is because Dupas and Brunton, they both lived in Wood End, and Dupas also shopped in Sunbury where Renita had a second-hand clothing store. Now, I understand that Dupas was interviewed and gave an alibi on that. I don't know how strong that alibi is. He certainly was a person of interest. Renita had also had a fellow who had romantic interest in her that she had rejected. She was seen arguing with someone outside the shop on the day, and she was also purported to be trying to counsel people, including a violent offender that she was to see that day. But certainly one would hope with the advance in DNA that there's still a hope, and certainly Dupas remains a person of interest in that.
And what do you know about the unsolved murder of Margaret Elliott in 1975? Her body was found in Glen Eira after visiting her friend at Box Hill Hospital.
Yeah, April 15, 1975, she'd visited a friend who'd just had a baby. Her red Mazda was found in Box Hill, not far away, with blood on the seat and on the car door. But her body was found, as you said, in Glen Eira near High Street. But the car had been driven about between 140 and 170 kilometres. Well more. She was from Berwick, so it was about 30 kilometres. So it had been somewhere. The creepy thing there is that her family home was just one street away from where Catherine Headland would later live. Catherine was one of the Tynong North victims, and also one of the suspects lived in that vicinity, which is why her case is loosely badged in with Tynong North. Okay. To remind you about Tynong North, the bodies of Catherine Headland, Bertha Miller and Marie Sargent were all found in a small little dumping area off Brew Road, Tynong North. Later, about a kilometre away, the body of Naramu Stevenson was found. So we've got 4 bodies there. Around the same time, 2 women go missing, Alison Rook and Joy Carmel Summers from the Frankston area. Now, all these crimes are loosely badged up. The first investigation, sort of intelligence investigation, suggested there could be 2 or 3 killers, Catherine Headland, Bertha Miller and Anne-Marie Sargent, because they were all in the one area, dumped in the same spot. The possibility Stevenson was just a fluke in the same area, and the Frankston women another one. But a later investigation suggested it would be the one killer, which brings us to a fellow called Harold Janman. Harold Janman, he ran the projector at a cinema. He lived in the Frankston area, and he would pick hitchhikers or people at bus stops. And both Summers and Rook were waiting for a bus, and it was on that strip. And he would later say, look, I picked up 8 or 9 people along this area. He was taken to one of the crime scenes, which you wouldn't know that a body had been left there. But when he got to the spot, he walked around it. He knew the police believe he knew exactly where it was, and he didn't want to walk over that particular ground. He was asked about Sky Road. He said, I don't know what that is. But he'd been the projector official at the Sky Road's drive-in. So he'd driven there every day for a long period of time. Also, he had worked in Tynong right at the quarry at Brew Road, which put him there as well. So he became the number one suspect, always protested his innocence, but often, particularly with serial offenders, they actually put themselves in the investigation. And when he was picked up for trying to pick up a street worker, when he was given his name, when he was asked his name, he gave his name and then said, I'm the main suspect for Tynong North. So he put himself into it. But he died an old man, and so we'll never know the truth.
And this question is from Oliver. Sly, please tell me the disappearance of Bung Siriboon will be solved.
Yeah, she disappeared on Thursday, June 2, 2011. She was walking to school, as she always did, from her home in Boronia. She was dressed in her school uniform, and she was seen by a neighbour, and she just didn't get to school that day, and we've never heard anything since. I know one former head of the homicide squad, I won't say he's haunted, but that's the one he desperately would like to solve. It's everyone's nightmare, isn't it? You know, broad daylight, going to school and gone. The case remains open. There's a massive reward, and it's amazing how some of these cases that would seem hopeless all of a sudden just open up. There was a young man who was murdered over an insignificant amount of cannabis. They put out a reward, and just as an aside, there was some really grainy old CCTV footage of a man leaving a phone box. That's how long ago it was. And they had linked that phone call to the victim. And so they just did it really to placate the media, to give them something to have. And very shortly afterwards, the phone rang. And it was someone saying, I know that gate. It's a bloke we all went to school with the victim. Mm. And so...
I remember that case well. His name was James Rousseau.
Yeah.
And I remember the first line in your story, which is James Rousseau was no gangster, but he died a gangster's death.
Yeah, it was terrible. Just a lovely family. Mm. And they went to the alibi witness's place, and he was having a get-together. And he said, I'll talk to you later. And they said, no, come out here. And he just said, I lied. He threatened me. And the alibi was that they'd been at the Forest Hill Cinema, I think, seeing Mission Impossible. And they sort of swapped clothes, and this bloke left. And the murder was not far from the Forest Hill Shopping Centre. And there was a conviction, and you knew his parents, and they're just lovely.
They're so, yeah. They sent me a Christmas card after.
Well, they sent me a bottle of whiskey, which was much better.
Hey.
And I remember being at their house, and you've seen that picture of James looking a bit impish, holding I reckon it was a snapper. And I made comment about the photo, and the dad said, well, that was bloody typical James. He arrived late. We'd already fixed the boat up. He went out, he caught the best fish, and he expected me to clean it.
And that was a terrific job that was done by that cold case team,
yes.
and in particular the detective that led that was Simon Hunt. I remember that well. So maybe the same thing could happen for Bung Siriboon. This next case, Sly, is such a good one. It's awful. It's so intriguing. It's got everything. This is the case of Willi Koeppen. He was widely regarded as one of Australia's first celebrity chefs. He had his own television show. It was called Chefs Present, and his disappearance in 1976 had it all. There was affairs and jealousy and intrigue, and it's all set in the hills outside of Melbourne in this like brash, kitschy German restaurant called Cuckoo.
Well, Cuckoo was iconic. It was that sort of smorgasbord of, sort of camp German.
Yeah, I think they brought the German smorgasbord, or widely credited as bringing the smorgasbord to Melbourne.
And Willi hated it because he was imprisoned by his own success. He was a celebrity chef. But basically, you go balmy just cooking schnitzels and sauerkraut. And the menu never changed, and every weekend it was the same, the beer drinking, the songs and so on. So he flipped out, and he was always declaring he was going to close the restaurant. Up in there, you'd be really surprised, but up there in the hills it was very groovy, and there were lots of affairs, and there's only so many times you can go to the Hillsville Sanctuary without getting bored. So everyone was sleeping with everybody, and Willi was sleeping with everybody, and then he didn't like that his wife was having an affair, so he wasn't equal opportunity in that regard. But so he was drinking heavily, he was violent, he'd been drinking with locals until 3 a.m, and then he disappeared.
Do you remember it? I think that was the question that the listener asked. Rowan asked, this happened a couple of years before your crime writing career began, so did you write about it?
Only in historical terms. I spoke to members of the family who wanted and still want conclusions there. There's a few people up in the hills who probably know. Chopper always suggested that it was Alex Tesmarcus. Alex was a terrible, terrible crook who killed a guy, Bruce Walker, just over a second-hand car. And Mark says that Tesmarcus said that he'd killed Koeppen over a gambling debt. Tesmarcus probably was the person who killed the 3 jewellers at Manchester Unity in a sort of what was supposed to be an insurance sting operation, but instead he just stole them.
Like an armed heist.
Yeah, yep. So he stole them in prison. Barry Robert Quinn teased him watching a movie, and he teased Alex about his girlfriend, which was, you sort of don't tease psychopaths in prison. And in those days you could smoke, and they were in the hobby room, and Alex just poured glue all over Quinn and then lit him up with a match. And Barry received terrible wounds and died from them. And some scallywag put a death notice in saying, "Barry, sorry to see you go. We always stuck together." Signed Alex Tesmarcus.
Yeah.
And Alex ended up being murdered inside prison as well. So that's the circle of life.
Yeah, I think on the Sunday, so Willi disappeared on a Saturday night in February in 1976.
Yeah.
Did I get that right?
February 29.
1976.
Yeah,
Great.
it's a leap year.
Glad my memory isn't completely gone. So on the Sunday, this is the day afterwards, 4 sex workers and their boss turned up for lunch at the Cuckoo. And the brothel madam told police that Mr. Koeppen invited them for lunch, had invited them for lunch 3 days earlier so he could choose one of the girls to take away with him to an island somewhere up in the north of Queensland. So some had actually searched for this connection between the sex workers and Tesmarcus. But the link was never established, and police were never able to confirm that Koeppen owed any money to him or that there was a relationship. So,
well, if Willi was looking at 4 sex workers, perhaps schnitzels are the new Viagra.
Well, it's interesting because that case, I met Willi's granddaughter Elkie. I'll never forget meeting her. Actually, she talked about her grandfather being this talented, charismatic, good-looking entrepreneur. He's brought this slice of like European charm and European cuisine to Melbourne, but at the same time, as you've spoken about, he was this flawed and sad man at the time of his death. But she believes, and as do others, believe that the answer lies in the original file. So when she says something like that, when police say the answer lies in the file, what does that mean?
It means, Ron Edwards would always say the answer's in the file, that nearly always the initial investigators have spoken to the killer.
Okay.
And in that case, there are a number of people, local, who had been drinking with him, who may or may not have the answer. But a little known fact, Andrew Rule wrote that Willi actually made pancakes for Hitler.
Back in Germany?
Well, not at Sassafras, no, yes.
Because he worked at the Hotel Adlon in Berlin before he came to Australia.
So he made
okay.
pancakes for Hitler, and then he came out here
I don't know
for the
about
Chevron.
I can't attest to that breakfast company.
So he came out for the 1956 Olympics to work at the Chevron Hotel.
Okay, yep. And final reader question, Sly, and perhaps let's circle back to where you started with Chopper. Nick asks, did you ever get nervous in developing first-name relationships with crims over the course of your career? So, Chopper, where did you draw the line between getting the access necessary to do your job and getting too close for comfort?
Pretty simple. Dealing with people, let's just call them colourful, I would try and remind myself, if this phone was tapped and a transcript was produced and I was giving evidence in the Supreme Court, would I be embarrassed? And you have to understand that there are pretty clever people within the underworld who would befriend reporters for a number of reasons. One is, don't underestimate how people like to have their names in the paper. And there were some crooks who felt the need for their notoriety to be known by the general public. There are others, such as the letter we just discussed with Veneman, who feel they're aggrieved and they perhaps want their story told. But there are others who see journalists as a resource. So they can't get information from the police, but they know a particular journalist may know stuff. And so they become adept at talking without saying anything while asking questions about the investigation. And we know, as I mentioned with phone taps, that there have been some reporters who are actively investigated for conspiracy to pervert. In the phone calls were seen as, let's just say not professional.
Okay. So one final self-indulgent question from me. Can you please recommend a really good crime-related book or TV series? What's your favourite?
Legend, the TV series, is seriously good. And may surprise you writing a column, but there's a couple of American books on columnists. Deadline Artists is a great book of some of the great columns, and people like Jimmy Breslin, the New York legendary columnist, who wrote a column 6 days a week and became part of New York Soul. His stuff could make you laugh, make you cry. And there's one piece that is available online called The Gravedigger, of which when President Kennedy was shot, he went and found the bloke who dug the grave. And it's a brilliant get, but the way it's written, anyone who likes good writing or aspires to be a journalist, go and read it.
Well, Sly, you've been a complete diva. All right, thank you very much for your time.
Thanks again. We'll see you next season.
Yeah, we'll see you next season.
This episode is written by me.
What's the preferred condiment with leather? Because I think Sly's about to eat a lot of leather in the next 15 minutes or so.
There'll be sauce all over it, we know that.
And was produced by the terrific Tammy Mills. Another bizarre tale in Naked City.
Black sauce. It's all true.
How do you end the podcast?
Mixing by the ever-reliable Cormac Lally. And remember, there is a touch of evil in all of us.
It's one thing to lose the upper hand. It's quite another to lose your hands altogether. So, until we meet again, this is Anthony Quayle reminding you that there is a touch of evil in all of us. Good night.